Welcome to On the Table with Ashley. This is episode 6 of our wellness series, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of wellness, cutting through the noise of quick fixes and fleeting health trends to uncover what wellness truly looks like. Each episode, you'll hear from experts across different fields as they share how they approach health, from physical and mental health to holistic and alternative practices, to give you real lasting ways to care for your mind, body, and spirit. Our guests this episode are Dr. Kelly Woodward and Autumn Bear, who we are so excited to welcome back onto the podcast for a second episode. Dr. Kelly Woodward is a preventive and family medicine physician with over 30 years of experience in lifestyle and integrative health, with a career that includes serving as a consultant in public health and a 22-plus year tenure in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a colonel. Dr. Woodward brings deep expertise in chronic disease prevention, longevity, and lifestyle medicine. After leading wellness programs at Intermountain Park City Hospital, he joined the Autumn Bear Wellness Collective, where he focuses on helping patients thrive through balanced longevity and mindful living. Autumn Bear is the founder of the Autumn Bear Wellness Collective, a space where modern medicine meets ancient healing. Trained in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, Autumn blends traditional medicine and spirituality to guide people towards deeper wellness and self-connection. Autumn holds a Master of Public Health from the University of Arizona, licensed in acupuncture in Utah and New York, and a board-certified diplomat. Autumn has taught in global programs integrating acupuncture into medical settings. Her work focuses on whole person healing, community connection, and empowering people to take on active roles in their health. Enjoy.
Dr. Woodward and Autumn Bear, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to speak with you both. Autumn, it's so fun to speak with you again. And Dr. Woodward, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure too.
So Autumn knows this, but I always like to start just hearing a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you were. And Autumn, I'm going to have you repeat it too, because we get different listeners to every episode. So why don't you start?
I was a kid that was very inquisitive about just life in general. And I really just loved exploring. I grew up kind of in a rural area, and I played outside all the time. And I was really, really interested in the world around me. And I made friends with literally, I knew everybody. I mean, literally, I knew everybody, every waiter, people would come by and be like, "Oh, Autumn." And my mom was like, "Who's that?" So I was both a people person and a curious kid, and, loved learning and being outside. So yeah.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Okay.
And then we moved to Southern Arizona when I was about 9. So I grew up out in the desert after that.
And I know you love to read. Did you start reading a lot as a child?
Yeah, I've always been a big reader from the beginning.
Yeah. And Dr. Woodward, I'm going to now call you Kelly.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Where are you from?
So I grew up actually in west of Salt Lake City, Twilla, Utah.
Oh, yeah.
It was a small town then, very small, so kind of a small town, semi-rural youth. I was a peculiar kid. So then, similar to Autumn, a very curious, always kind of a wonder-struck kid. I was curious about everything. I spent a lot of time in nature, a lot of time outdoors, exploring, camping, turning over rocks, collecting plants, poking insects. And then I also spent a lot of time, in the built environment. I loved the mechanics of things. I would take things apart, and I would sometimes successfully reassemble them. I would build things that I conjured up in my own head. And I played a lot of sports. I did all kinds of, just tried a little bit of everything. It was kind of the way I was. I hate to say it, I've kind of continued that a bit, which does create a bit of a focus problem. Sometimes I have to just remind myself to pick something. But as a kid, it was just fabulous.
And do each of you have siblings? Did you grow up with siblings?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yep. I have just one sister.
Yeah. And I have a brother and a sister. And my older brother, his birthday today.
Happy birthday,
David. He and I were, we were together on this curious journey, and our younger sister watched us in some dismay and about what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So fun. Kelly, what then put you on the path? It sounds like you could have become an engineer, like based on the things you were interested in as a child. So what put you on the medical path?
Yeah, that's the right question. Because I think actually, if I were to look back I could have been an engineer. My brother's an engineer, by the way. So I feel like I kind of have that mind, very mathematically oriented. But anyway, I kind of got onto the healthcare medical path because my family is full of medical people. And I watched my grandfather was the only surgeon in that whole western part of the state of Utah. And I lived with him part of my youth and kind of saw the amazing things he was doing.
So did you know from a young age that you wanted to go to medical school or not?
Did I know, or that was just imprinted in me? Somewhere along the way, that was just like what I was going to do. I mean, I don't remember actually contemplating it that much. I
So
contemplate it
interesting.
more now than I did way back then.
So I'm a lawyer by training, and both my father and stepfather were lawyers. And so when you say it was imprinted, I understand what that means, but I actually thought I was not going to be a lawyer, and then I ended up in that profession. So I think most people don't grow up saying, this is what I'm going to be, but some people do, and it's so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about that.
In medicine, always. But I thought I was going to be an anesthesiologist. That was the path that I was planning on.
Okay. And then what changed that?
I think, I had, like most people, I had a bunch of life experiences, and I'd done some travel internationally, and I'd gotten quite sick. And when I came back, I was in I was late teens, early 20s. And a friend of our family who was this beautiful artist, and he was so avant-garde and so ahead of the times. And he just happened to say to me, Autumn, you should try acupuncture. And this was at a time when acupuncture had barely been legalized in the United States.
Yeah.
And because I'm curious, I was like, that sounds fun, right?
Yeah.
Like I thought it would be really neat, and I really fell in love with it. And I thought it was really perplexing and interesting, and it made me feel better almost instantaneously. And then continued to pursue it over time. And then as things went on, and I was in grad school for public health, and I hadn't quite made up my mind how I was going to proceed from there. And then I just kind of veered so deeply into Chinese medicine, and it just kept my interest so greatly that I just decided to keep going with that.
Yeah, and it's still your passion today. Yeah. So you have been on the podcast before, and we talked about acupuncture and the history of Chinese medicine, and also about treating long COVID specifically. But you have since expanded your practice. It's now called the Autumn Bear Wellness Collective. So tell us why you did that and what you're hoping to achieve with the Wellness Collective. And then we'll speak with Kelly about why he chose to join the Wellness Collective at this stage of his illustrious career.
Yeah. Well, I feel very lucky to be part of someone's life for a little snapshot of time. But I also fully recognize that my particular set of tools isn't always going to be everything that someone needs. And I really love integrative care. And I really love the concept of having really good quality integrative care, because what I see it, from the Eastern perspective, when someone tries to do integrative care, a lot of times it's kind of coming from the top down. What that means is that there's a lot of Western minded doctors who are like, yeah, let's just throw some acupuncture in there. It's popular. I think I've heard it works for back pain, right? But coming from a person who has taken this on as a life study and who understands the depth and magnitude that Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine can, and how it can impact someone's life, I want to integrate the Western side kind of almost from the back end, right? We're taking Eastern philosophy, Eastern medical practice, and then with that, utilizing the best aspects of Western medicine and all the best things that it can, so that you're bringing those two pieces together, not as an afterthought, but as the greatness that each of them hold, and then putting them together so that you're collectively expanding and growing the experience that someone can have, and not just heavy-handed on one side and then brushed into something on the side because someone has heard, maybe that's all right? I want the power of both, right? And they are very powerful in their own way.
Yeah, and to sort of speak the same language, so to speak. So sometimes if I'm coming to see you and then I'm going to see my shoulder doctor, I had surgery last year, which is when I started to see Autumn. And if, they're disjointed. And so having them together sort of under the same roof, so to speak, to me makes a lot of sense. A lot of the issues. I mean, there are a lot of issues in our healthcare system, but one of them is that our systems and the practitioners don't speak to each other, and one person doesn't know what the other person is doing or trying to work on or treating, all of that. And then what we talked about the last time is treating the whole person. And a lot of the history of Chinese medicine is it's not just my shoulder, it's my entire being. And it's not just my physical being, it's also my mental being. And all of that comes into play with my total well-being. And my focus in this series is on wellness, which is a very big area. But I feel like what you two and the other practitioners that are part of the practice are endeavoring to do is to have East meet West in an integrated approach, treat the body and the mind for ultimately our well-being. And Kelly, we'll get into longevity because, well, I'm very interested in that. I'm in the second half of my life, but I think a lot of people are interested in that. And it feels like such a good foundation for the Wellness Collective.
Well, I think there's also, when you're thinking about those conversations, I think the fallacy about Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine and Western medicine is that they are so different. And they're not.
Yeah.
They're both medicine. We use different tools, and our diagnostics are going to be a little different based on the history behind how things developed and where things are evolving and what we rely on to look at the body and how we do that. They each have their own strengths, certainly, but there is so much more in common than there is different. And I think that bridging that conversation, both in the practice of our medicine, as well as giving people an opportunity to be part of a system, allows them to be seen and not just passed on from person to person. That collectiveness is what happens when you sit down at a table, and we have very different experiences and our life choices have taken us in all kinds of different ways. But when we sit and talk about what it means to care for someone, we are both coming to the table with the same idea, and that is to help that person get better.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where we're coming from as a collective.
So Kelly, let's hear both about a little bit about your career and then why now to join the Wellness Collective and what you hope to achieve at the Wellness Collective that you maybe haven't felt like you've been able to achieve in the practice that you were in. But you served in the military for 22 years, and you also have worked at a public health department. So I'm interested, tell us a little bit about your career and how you came here, and then we'll dig in a little more.
Yeah, well, I'm a believer in wandering through life. So I set out in my medical career, and there were some well-established sort of wickets I had to jump through. But then I started having choices about what I wanted to do next, and thought I kind of knew, like Autumn had alluded to, about kind of thinking you knew what you wanted to do. And then I found myself in family medicine, and I actually started in the military because I had advice to say, well, you could have your medical school paid for if you let the military pay for it, and then you owe them a few years, and everybody calls it good. And then I found out, I liked that. I mean, I liked what I was doing. I was doing such a variety of things in the military. It was an incredible experience. As in the medical profession, we got to do a lot. I mean, I got to do a lot of different things. And so it was really intriguing. And so I continued in that, which led me to other different things because by its nature, we moved around, and I found myself involved in federal policy in Washington, D.C., working for Assistant Secretary of Defense, the Surgeon General of the Air Force, all these people, and it's kind of fascinating because it's a really rigorous and really sort of intellectually challenging sort of sport, all the while trying to keep a little foot in the door of just direct patient care. But that got a little difficult. Anyway, so I kind of got into a lot of desk work, but that was in a lot of health planning. And then I got into preventive medicine formally, spent some time at Johns Hopkins. I've been asked, where did this preventive sort of foundation come from in my career? And it's interesting. It did come from the military mostly, and it was a fascinating thing as I look back on it because I don't know if you had to be there or had to be in my head to kind of get it. But what I had incredibly healthy people, fighter pilots. I mean, 28-year-old fighter pilots who had to come in and we had to check to make sure they were healthy. And we'd go like, yep, you're healthy by all our measures. And they go, yeah, how can I be better? How can I be healthier? I'm like, whoa, let me think about that for a minute. I'm not quite sure we really know how to be better than what healthier than you are. But that extrapolated to, okay, that sort of same kind of notion carried on as I started aging, and I started, also dealt with people who were older. And then that whole concept extrapolated to how do I be healthier and older all at once?
Yeah.
And that's kind of again, it's a sort of an, existential sort of construct, but it's pretty powerful in my mind about, well, what do we mean by that even? And what should we expect?
Yeah.
I mean, I started by telling these people, look, you're perfectly healthy. We don't know anything you can do better about all these measures.
So what did you learn about the healthy 28-year-old and how to improve their health, which then you probably have taken into the rest of your practice?
Yeah. So the healthy 28-year-old at that level of health, I mean, that's
Right.
That's elite health.
Right.
I mean, those are the people who next become like astronauts. And I assure you, they don't send anybody to space who's not pretty darn healthy. Yeah, it's mostly about setting expectations, frankly, and safety, really. It's more, at that age, it's a bit more of, okay, just don't mess this up. Don't put substances in your body that are really bad for your health, like alcohol, too much alcohol,
Processed food.
smoking, other illicit drugs. I mean, not that military people don't tend to do that.
Yeah.
And also get in the habit, start building the habits to maintain a maximum health as you get older, because the rest of the story is it's all going to start to change.
Right.
Because we all have an arc of life that is different. And to really, I think a lot of it is we're all every second on that journey and at a different place on that journey. And so if you don't start setting the tone of, okay, what are you going to do to make it the best it can be going forward? Because we're really not talking about right this instant. We're talking about you're a little older next year.
Right.
A little older next year. How do you be the best you can be? So as you get older, it gets to be a bit of a different discussion, and that's where longevity comes in. After about age 30, lots of age-related effects of change in physiology, anatomy, certainly social dynamics change, and people need to embrace the power of staying healthy, being as healthy as you can be, and it changes as you get older in terms of what your expectations ought to be.
So after 30, I think biologically you're saying our cells are dying, or whatever's actually starting to happen that's changing. Like we used to be able to sleep a couple hours and be fine, and now we can't do that kind of thing. But do you advocate, like, what age are your patients? Because now your focus is on longevity, is my understanding. So at what age would you suggest somebody start coming to see you, for example, and or thinking about the longer term? So I have teenagers. They are clearly not thinking about the longer term right now. And it's fascinating. I think we're less aware of it when we're like young and healthy, but now through my, 51-year-old eyes, watching my teenagers be able to stay out late and be fine the next day or what have you, and I cannot do that, I'm much more aware of it. And so my husband and I are much more focused on our health and sleep and nutrition and all of these things than they are. But we're also trying to teach them the importance of these things now. I'm not sure they can hear us, but at what age do you think people can start to hear that and play? It's more like planning. We plan for our futures in all kinds of ways. Education, athletics, whatever, financially. But I think, at what age do you think people can start to hear and plan for their longevity?
Yeah.
When do you spend the most time with the people you love? For us, it's at home, around the dinner table with family, or sipping cocktails in the living room with friends. So why not make that time even more meaningful by imbuing your gatherings with pieces that not only make connecting easier, but spark conversation around your table? Autumn's collection of small batch, artisan, quality-made pieces for tabletop and home are not only made for simple serving, they're works of art designed for daily use. Whether you're hosting a dinner party or sitting down for family game night, our collections create a sense of presence and peace in every home. Shop our collection of dinnerware, drinkware, serveware, and more at amatond.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com. Gather by design.
Yeah, I think there is a transition, from people sort of interested in being healthy at a young age. But that gets to be a little different about, okay, now as soon as you start to recognize and realize that things change over time. Like you said, think about like sleep or the person who wants the mountain bike, but they can't keep up with the 32-year-old because they're 45. And that's might just be reality at different, our physiology changes. So sometime by the 40s, I think by early 40s, most people start to sense that, okay, it's not always going to be like it was when I was 20. And of course, young people, if something is bothering them, they want it fixed. But it's very different when people start to almost get that sense that, okay, things change as we get older. If your vision starts to change, your hormones start to change, or your hair gets thinner, or you start to find out it's a little harder to not gain a little bit of extra fat, or it's a little harder to make some muscle. That's when people start to get attentive. I would say, though, in my experience, most people are kind of in their 50s when it really becomes more acutely of importance to them. I have generally told people by about 45, you ought to start thinking about how am I doing setting myself up for the long game. And then, of course, the peril in that is that some people aren't in their best circumstance when they get there. It's
right.
How do you improve that while intersecting a healthy lifespan curve out there as best you can? But certainly that's when people really ought to start to have a plan.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the plan, but before we do that, what drew you to joining the Wellness Collective?
Yeah. So I retired from my full-time practice about a year ago, and that was very purposeful. I love what I was doing, and I think I was helping some people. I needed more time. I had some, family obligations I wanted to be much more available for. And so I felt like I really needed to scope down the amount of hours I was working. And then over the last year or so, I certainly recognized that I still want to work with people, and I want to be able to do it. And I'm in a situation where I can do it. Autumn has a wonderful setting there where we start with the foundation of the notion of we're truly about health, and we can really start there. We're not about other complex institutional or organizational issues per se in terms of how we work.
Yeah.
And we're able to work, and I wanted to be able to just consult with individuals kind of on their agenda and help in that format where I could really focus on that without expectations other than what they're there for and how we can help them.
Yeah. Which sounds like a whole nother conversation about the healthcare system, which we're not going to get into today, but I think is fascinating and is worth people spending time researching and understanding. But let's get back to the plan. I'm going to call it the plan. So somebody comes in to see you. They might be in their early 40s, they might be in their early 50s or older or younger. But does the plan vary dramatically person to person, or are there tenets of the plan that everybody can learn from?
Yeah, it's the latter. I mean, there are kind of some foundational things that really apply to all of us. And I guess this is just an opportunity for me to make a strong point. Yes, we are all individuals.
Yes.
But among us as a species, we're more similar than different.
Which is a point I like to make beyond health to all kinds of perspectives and like human experience.
Exactly.
I completely agree.
Yeah. But when it comes to health, so we know, we have to kind of think of it as you've got to work with your physiology. You can't defy it. Yes, your teenage sons can defy it, and they can.
They beat biology just a little bit.
Yeah, and they sort of get away with it. I tell people you kind of get away with it until you're about 40, and after that, you're not getting away with anything. So, sleep is foundational, and it is not negotiable. 1/3 of your life spent on sleep.
Yeah.
Write the check. Now, you can have variation from time to time, travel, social circumstance, somebody gets ill in the middle of the night. I mean, there's reasons to be awake, but your routine ought to be back to fundamental sleep. We all need about 1/3 of our lives dedicated to that as an adult, and it's not negotiable for long-term health. So that's one of the foundational things. Other is certainly diet and nutrition. I think we're slowly starting to unroof the problems in our kind of modern food has evolved in our culture, the availability of it, how we present it, how we store it, distribute it, meaning process it and do all these other things, probably kind of perilous. The third is just physical activity and exercise. And two slightly different things. Exercise is the organized intense, often, what we call high intensity, low volume activity that we do for typically a shorter period of time in our day. And then physical activity is the low intensity, high volume thing of what do you do for the other 16 hours you're awake, and that's all the puttering about. And those are three of the foundations. And then the fourth one is really your social environment.
Community, yeah.
And
connection.
And we'll talk more, I hope, about that because that is so way underappreciated, the deep essence of that.
But that doesn't mean social media connections. It means like your environmental connections, right?
No, exactly. And it means humans.
Humans.
If we have to prove it scientifically, okay, we will. That watching some generative technology created, visual and auditory sort of human interaction is not going to be the same as, us sitting together in the same room. I assure you that is not the same thing.
Well, I think there have been some studies about this. I've certainly read about them.
To start saying, this is really important.
Well, I think that one of the studies that I read was saying that your social connectivity had a larger impact on your longevity and health span over whether or not you were a smoker or not.
Yeah.
That's how big of an impact it actually makes on how long you live.
Yes, it is huge. Anyways, that's it. And then the kind of the converse side of the plan is to not sort of poison yourself. In other words, don't screw it up by chemicals and injury. Because those things are kind of, you want to be, those are the things you want to not have.
Right.
The other things are things you want to have.
Right. Okay. So this is great. The plan includes sleep, nutrition, activity, connection. And then you can see how in each one of those, it just really depends on the individual and the struggles they have. Like I used to sleep so easily. And then when I hit menopause, it was like I had to completely relearn how to sleep and what I needed to do to support myself. A big reason I wanted to do this series on wellness is that I feel like we see a lot about menopause now, which is great because we didn't used to talk about it. We see a lot about health span versus lifespan, which is great because we didn't really used to talk about these things. But the other thing we see a lot of is quick fixes, easy things to do. And my experience has been that there's nothing quick or easy about it. And that it's actually the little things that I do consistently that are the most powerful for me. And I'm interested with both of you, if that's what you see with patients, like it's not one big thing, but it's small things over time, sort of like the financial analogy. We've been talking to our kids about the power of compounding and that a lot of people who can never get out of credit card debt, it's because it's the opposite. It's the bad part of compounding where the credit card companies charge you this large fee every month and you can't get out from under it. But the same is true on the good side of compounding where you put something away and you forget it's there and then come back 10 years later and it's worth a lot more. And I think of health and wellness in the same way. I am worried about this sort of like quick fix mentality that I seem to see everywhere. So I would love for you guys to both just comment on that. Are you seeing in your practice people coming in and looking for the quick fix? Are they easily redirected to it's not that easy and I'm going to do the hard work? Or what is that looking like these days?
I think because we practice very different elements of medicine, most of the time when people come in to see me, they're not looking for the quick fix because they know that there may not be a pill they can take for that, right? And some people really want that quick fix because the truth of the reality in all aspects of health is it requires work. But what I can say when we're talking about investment and putting money away, you don't just put a large sum away all at once because you never really make all that much in one setting. It's the little bits of money that you put away on a consistent, regular basis that ultimately collectively become that larger investment. And it's the same thing with health, right? We make choices on a daily basis because I do think that when people think about health and they're like, health, right? And it's like this big, thing for this big category of things to think about. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. They're like, oh, I've got to do all these things for my health. And I kind of equate it to dancing, right? I was a professional dancer for a very long time and I was a partner dancer. So I'd get these people that would come in and I was like, okay, we're going to just walk forward. But because they had this theory in their mind that they had to quote unquote dance, they would awkwardly kind of like move their bodies forward. I was like, no. I just need you to walk forward. This is something we practice day in and day out. But because in theory, in their mind, it was going to be so hard and it kind of broke things down too quickly, it becomes the culmination of small choices that we make on a daily basis. There's no quick fixes, but there are choices. And like, let's say, I discovered gluten-free Oreos one day and I was like, wow, I think I'll have a few of these. But it doesn't mean that I do that every day, right? Like I had a moment in time where I was like, wow, this is great. But it was like, yeah, you wake up the next day, you go, okay, got it. And then you kind of like course correct or, because sometimes I think people set these New Year's resolutions. I'm going to go to the gym every day this week or year or month or whatever. I think that becomes too overwhelming.
Yeah.
If if there are no quick fixes to the longevity of and our health span, and we have to make small choices, you just choose little things that you can control every day. You go to bed a little bit earlier. If you're having struggles with your sleep, find someone that can help you with it, right? If you are not sure about what to eat, usually the guidelines are the closer to the earth that it comes from, the better it is for your body, right? It's like the perimeter of the grocery store. Even just start there, right? If you're, not sure about, like alcohol is a really good example. If you want a parameter around alcohol, maybe a couple drinks a week, no more than that, right? There's a lot of those types of choices that we can make that will in fact make a massive impact down the road.
Kelly, anything to add?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I've been struck by how I sometimes meet people for the first time in one of these kind of conversations as patient and where they are.
Yeah.
And to your point, what I am surprised about is how many come in because they are hearing about all the quick fixes and they're kind of saying to them, there are quite a few people who are saying to themselves, I don't know if that's right. Now, there are some who are just going, that sounds great to me.
Sign me up.
Because there are plenty of them, enough to certainly keep that as a successful business model for people who do that. But they come in and they want to talk about it and kind of see how do we reconcile all this? And certainly I agree completely with Autumn about, it's about the small steps. Part of the essence of the whole thing about a small steps is what you are embarking on is a journey for the rest of your life. And if you go on the journey, you're going to have a longer life. So It's even a longer journey. So you aren't about to try to accomplish it all instantly. In fact, if you look at the published research on various aspects of like longevity, it's gone up exponentially this century. So since 2000, the amount of scientific research done in what is considered some aspect of human longevity is we do more each year now than we ever did in human times before in scientific research on this notion of longevity, which, by the way, among the experts researching it is still a bit of a fuzzy concept of what exactly are we talking about.
Yeah.
And so I do talk to people about the quick fixes. Autumn and I like to periodically use the phrase about longevity. It's not about chemistry. It's not about just putting some chemical in your body that must be better to have than not, or more is better. It isn't actually that. I mean, there's plenty of chemistry in the human body, no doubt, but it's more functional. It's more, what are you doing with all these various activities, sleep, exercise? How do you fuel your body? How do you spend your time with other human beings? Is much more than buy some product and that must fix it. In fact, the point of all that is that nobody's actually studied any of those products over a long human life.
Right.
So if you want to think of it scientifically, it's like, well, we don't know what that does over a long human life because none of them have been studied for more than 10 years.
And are you referring to things like certain supplements or cold plunges or those kinds of things?
All those things. Certainly lots of supplements have sort of anti-aging sort of properties. There are chemicals that seem to sort of be important for the aging processes. But interestingly enough, most of the things that are studied are already in the human body. And so to think that adding more fixes it is kind of a scientific leap of faith, but it seems it's sort of seductive to the mind that wants to be efficient about it and has other things to do in their day that, well, why don't I just take that? So I do tell people that, most of them are probably pretty safe. We're not hearing about a lot of them being, horribly dangerous. Most of them are pretty expensive. So I say, well, I doubt if you'll hurt yourself if you want to spend some money that way. But the conversation never ends there. Because I say, now here's what you really need to do. And it's the stuff that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We used to we'd see a lot of like business executives, and they have these executive health plans. And I mean, I know this, is how it works. I used to do these things. They would, their assistant would schedule their all day, come in and we'll do all the medical stuff. And they felt good because they'd go, see, I could go tell my board I did it. I went, got checked up. I'm fine. But every time I would see them and they were so disappointed because I might say, yeah, things look pretty good. We don't see any big perils. But guess what? Now you're going to talk to all my colleagues about how to do all the things you have to do if you want to stay that way. Because just coming in today and having me check the box may not help you live that much longer.
Right.
Well, there's also, I think there's, different types of therapeutic intervention, but I do really feel like there's an aspect of personal responsibility when it comes to, health, knowing that we have to just write off that check a third of our lifetime. I feel like there's always a certain type of person that's like, well, but if you could just like go around this way, right? And knowing I do think that there's a lot of lifestyle choices that we make that contribute tremendously to our health. And when we're looking at our health, it's about taking that ownership and looking at like, what are the choices I'm making on a regular basis? I used to live in New York City. I had a practice in New York City. And I'd have people that would come in all the time and they would say, I just can't sleep. And I would say, well, how many cups of coffee are you having a day? I don't know, like 4 or 6 and I was like, okay, well, we could start there,
Right.
There are often little patterns we get ourselves into that can kind of get us into funny little spots. But when you take ownership in recognition that our health is ours to, obviously there are therapeutic interventions when we need them. That is different than making cognitive decisions on a daily basis and taking ownership over what we're doing and knowing that what we're doing has an impact, right?
I think in fairness to Americans, we were not taught this. So I worked at 23andMe for a long time. And what really excited me about 23andMe was 2 things. My father had a rare disease and I thought, what a great platform for rare disease research. But also the focus of Anne and Linda, the founders, was on moving from treatment to prevention. And I just really believed in that. And if you go back and you both probably know this, but it's not that long ago that a doctor wouldn't tell you had cancer. Like you weren't capable of handling it. And it's such a paternalistic system, our healthcare system. And I think it's still predominantly that way, where it's like you go in to see a physician and that physician knows better than you. And that physician is going to tell you what to do. And it's not your responsibility. It's your physician's responsibility. And I think that's just so wrong because we have as far as we know, we've got one life to live. And I mean, people believe other things religiously, which is great. But, we are on this earth and at least for this life, this is what we've got. And it should be our own responsibility to manage that, but we're not really taught. I don't feel we're really taught that in this country. I don't know if you feel like that's changed, but I think it's actually a bigger ask of people than we might think. And I think, step 1 is getting people to really take ownership. Like it is actually your responsibility.
Well, I think there's, if I might just come from a Chinese medical perspective, there's, when we look at disease, the first and foremost, when we see people is, we say there are no incurable diseases, there are only incurable people. So, and a lot of that because a lot of it has to do with mindset, a lot of it has to do with cultivation and self-cultivation, which is a really big part of something that I work a lot with my patients on. But I do think that we should also look at when there's an intervention that has to happen for whatever reason. We all have stuff. Like I have stuff. Everybody gets stuff. I think it's an opportunity for change. And I think it's a real opportunity when we have a moment in time where things aren't perfect, right? Because there isn't an expectation that longevity equals perfection. Longevity is about how we work through both the daily experience and also the things that occur to us. You know, there are people that will have massive casualties in their family all within short succession. And that has a huge impact on their health and wellness and longevity, right? And it's not even just about those little things that we're talking about, whether we're eating right or the chemicals. There's big impacts that happen in all different ways in these wild, messy lives that we live. And I do think it's important to also just realize that things happen. We end up in a moment in time where we're looking for somebody else to say to us, like, here's some ideas on how we can help you. But a lot of that is an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity for that person to take that information and say, okay, where am I in this whole space and time? What is this disease that I'm experiencing? What do I learn and grow from this experience? And how do I then move forward beyond it, right? And I think those are really important questions that we ask ourselves in any circumstance when we have an interaction with any kind of physician. It is about ownership, and it's also about finding the right team. So we can't do everything ourselves, right? And so you find that person that's going to help you through it and not just something that's going to mitigate for a moment, because if you're truly growing through that experience and really taking that as an opportunity for change, you want to find that team member or team members that are going to help you do that. And I think that's part of the ownership piece of it as well.
Anything to add?
Yeah. Slightly different angle on that is that I think to your point earlier about how culturally kind of where are we or what did we kind of grow up having influenced how we think about health and wellness is that we actually do have unfortunately, our health system kind of creates the illusion that we'll just fix whatever goes wrong.
Right.
And that's a bit of a self-fulfilling sort of thing for a profession, but it's not a healthy thing for people to kind of have a little bit in their minds. And we see this in people all the time. I have patients all the time who go, you would be much better to exercise than get X, Y, or Z replaced, and they want to get it replaced. It's much easier than doing the long work, but not as effective. We have created an underlying sense that you don't have to worry about that much. There are people who fix those things. Well, that's a pretty dangerous trap. First of all, we can't fix some things, and your life will not be the same for having had those things or having had them fixed than if you had never had them in the first place.
Right.
So we aren't quite there culturally. And again, my only kind of dig against the kind of the healthcare industry, or at least the only very broad, it's too big a machine, almost 20% of our GDP. And somehow we got people buying into they must need that much of it.
Right.
And that isn't actually the case for most people. Now, there are fabulous things that our colleagues do in medicine, and I'm all for it. It's an entirely different side of the coin about what are you really going to do to have the healthiest, longest life you can possibly have, joyous life.
Yeah. So one of the things, not everyone can afford to come see you guys. And I'm mindful of this as I do this series too, because I prioritize health and wellness, and I'm fortunate that I can come see you. But I know that not everybody can. And I do think it's helpful to have some advice for people who maybe can't do that. So that's reasonable. That's not sort of like the quick fix. I spoke with Dr. Crawford, who's a fertility doctor as part of this series, and she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, if you are choosing between exercise and sleep, choose sleep. If you haven't slept well and you're going to wake up at 6 a.m. and do a workout, don't do the workout, get the sleep. And that has actually made a pretty big difference for me, because I always prized exercise growing up and maybe overdid it at some juncture in my life where I was prioritizing exercise over sleep, I would say. So I don't know if you agree with that, but also if there are other things like that where, because I think, listen, if you're having trouble sleeping, you're going to have to seek help. You can try to read and try things on your own, but ultimately you might have to seek help. There are certain things where you're going to have to seek help for a specific thing. But I do think having these kind of like macro ideas, like the perimeter of the grocery store, that are helpful for people. So if you have a couple of those, I think it would be interesting.
Well, sleep is what I would tell people is the first thing you probably ought to be thinking about. How do I get that right? Partly because it is essential regardless. So people have to go on that journey at some point. And it's much simpler sometimes than the simplest parts of sleep. So first of all, to recognize that most of us, our peak drive to sleep occurs sometime around 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. So don't blow through that.
Yeah.
Embrace that, because that's why you're still awake at midnight, is because you blew through it. And now you're not back to sleep. So in other words, I jokingly, every wife I talk to, I can say, I'll bet your husband falls asleep on the couch at 9:30 if you turn the TV on. And then they claim they're not asleep. I'm not asleep. Well, that's because they are in N1 sleep, the first stage of sleep, because their peak drive to sleep occurs then. And if you wake up then afterwards and go, okay, I think I'll get up and putter around a little bit, then I'll go to bed, then you lay in bed not able to sleep. So that's the first mistake. So something simple as just moving sleep time start forward. I cannot tell you how many people I have said, look, just put on the invitation to your party. Party ends at 9. I'm going to bed. You're welcome to stay, but I'll be in bed. And how many people actually, there are a lot of smart people, and they heard that and said, I think I'll try. And they came back and reported, wow, what a difference. Because then you start sleep. What you want to get is the actual orchestrated physiology of sleep. It isn't the absence of activity. It's this very complex process that starts when you get the drive in your brain to sleep. That's there for a purpose. And everything that follows, you have to let it happen. So I do agree sleep is kind of a first adjustment. Exercise, that is a little negotiable, but not physical activity, right? So not moving. So there's a difference between how hard am I going to work my muscles and my heart and lungs for a brief period of time today versus what am I going to do all day? And that is a whole different thing. You don't sleep and then sit around all day. You can sleep, maybe not have your structured exercise, but as a species, we don't survive if we're not moving around all day. I mean, we would be eaten by some carnivore. So we are fundamentally a species that moves all day.
And we're built to move.
That's our physiology and our anatomy.
Literally built to move.
And I feel like I've read recently some studies on office workers having much poorer health outcomes. Like if they're not, I mean, you can be in an office and you can set your alarm every hour or whatever to get up and move or what have you. So I think that there's data that bears that out as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that what the data say is that what we call, that physical activity all through the day, the low intensity, high volume, all day, what I call puttering around, turns out in a full day, that is equally as beneficial as the 1 hour exercise, structured exercise.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So that's why we tell people, if for some reason you don't have an opportunity to get some structured exercise, which by the way is still important too.
Right.
But if you can't do that because you're, vacuuming your house, well, guess what? There's a huge amount of value in vacuuming your house, not just for cleanliness, but for your health. People need to appreciate it's in our nature.
And I think movement, is like, if you look at our physiology, how we're built, the way our spine and the absorption of movement, the whole thing is built. I feel like the majority of diseases often come with the lack of movement, not because we move too much. And It's not really about people take exercise a little too far and they just go. There's something almost like an achievement that happens with if I accomplish this big thing and look at my big muscles and whatever it was. I ran a 26-mile marathon. All of those are kind of achievements. But the reality of movement is that the articulation of all of our muscles, it's not just that the force of doing weight-bearing exercise. It's like the articulation of our movement, the articulation of how we exercise our brains when we're utilizing both of our hands, the neurological stimulation that comes with that. There's the circulation of our blood. There's so much that happens in movement that it's not, I can see why, someone who's stuck in an office chair all day long would end up suffering from a lot more disease because, it's really about the lack of movement and the excess of that kind of stasis, right? So stasis is what creates so many more problems than actual movement itself.
And just an add-on to that is that, I talk to people a lot about chronic back pain and things, and people are amazed to learn that the lowest stress position for our spine is actually standing and walking. Less stress than laying down, less stress by far than sitting in a chair, way less stress than sitting in a car chair, which for some reason is remarkably bad. A car seat, which is a seat in a car, is remarkably bad for our spine. But just the way the forces, development of the spine, it's at its best when we're standing and walking, well, even better, walking. And so you got to embrace that. And I hate to say it for people I used to see a lot of airline pilots, flying international flights, and they're like, boy, this is kind of taking a toll on me. People need to do these jobs. I get it. But boy, we got to figure out how to make the best of these circumstances. And
how do we support them?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just knowledge, knowing.
I think knowledge is huge. I mean, even just listening to you, and I think in this town in Park City, I see a lot of like, okay, I'm going from yoga to bar to like, how many classes am I doing a day?
Right.
Plus a hike or whatever. There's this like overachievement in exercise, and I think that can be detrimental. So I think so number one, the sleep and the drive to sleep, which I've never heard that term, which I like. And so focusing on getting sleep right and listening to your body. I mean, I think at the end of the day, for me in my 50s, it's really about listening to my body. And our body actually is telling us more than we may hear. So maybe partially, and I don't know if you feel like partially what you're doing is helping people hear their bodies. Does that make sense in their particular, like whether it's nutrition or sleep or movement and I do want to get into community, but I think sometimes we stop listening, and I don't know why we do that.
I think it's in the training. You were talking about this earlier, where as Americans, we're easily sold a bunch of goods, and we're told like these goods are what you need, right? Look at all these things you need. You need classes. You need this. You need, some
fancy equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, like you need, right. But the reality of it is that when you get back to the real fundamental basics of what it means to live a long life, it comes down to the simplest of things. I kind of love that because it's accessible to everybody, right? When you were talking about maybe someone can't afford to come see us in particular, but the things that someone needs for the longevity and as a culture is really getting back to like, does your food come from the earth? Are you getting enough sleep and listening to that sleep drive when it is happening? Are you simply moving your body at volume, not necessarily at intensity? Because you're not winning a life gold medal if you do 3 classes in a day and you sweat a whole bunch. And in fact, you're more and like, the new thing that's like doing like exercise inside a very hot place, which is you're more prone to injury. You're more prone to dehydration. Like you're not winning if you're doing more. Yeah. Pull it back, eat well, sleep well, see your friends and family. Move your body a little bit on a consistent, regular basis. Ta-da!
It's interesting. I sum it up sometimes for patients. There was some recent, we'll call it a study, but it was really just kind of an analysis of some data that had been collected over the years about people who lived very long lives. These communities that have very high proportions of people who live over 100 years. And it's interesting. One analysis, they said, gosh, we figured out the one thing that is most common among all of them is that they garden. They grow their own food. Now, it's not all about the food they grew. That's some of it. But it's about they were out there. And if you know what it takes to garden, a vegetable garden, first of all, you got to walk the gardens. You can't send a drone out yet to do it. And your tractor isn't going to do a very good job of picking your tomatoes, I guarantee it.
Yep.
You have to walk the rows, which takes a little balance because it's a little uneven. And then you have to bend down and do stuff, which is incredibly healthy for your health. And by the way, you're a little closer to the dirt, which might have some immune enhancing properties. And you probably go to bed early because you're kind of tired. And you get up early because you got to make hay when the sun shines. I mean, it kind of almost sums it all up.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be growing your own food, but it's emblematic of those combination of things.
Thanks for listening to an episode of On the Table with Ashley. Subscribing to, rating, and reviewing our show helps us to continue to make quality episodes. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at ametendre.com or on Instagram at Amatant. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatant website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatant and Amatant's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatant.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along.